Okay, can you guys hear me well?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's an echo. One sec. So if I were to go back and try, say, junior interview myself, I think making sure that you have the right foundations. And by right foundations, I mean, like, if you don't know how to sort things, like, if you don't know what the complexity is, if you cannot articulate how to solve a binary search problem, these are so basic things. And making sure that all those foundational things you have a strong grasp and deep understanding. That's one. The other thing also, like, I feel, given the competition and the number of people applying for these jobs, preparation is a very critical thing. Like, I know a lot of good people, just because lack of preparation, they lose that chance. Even I know that they are very strong candidates. I think make sure that you do very well preparation. The other thing also, like, don't be shy. And a lot of people, I think, when the question is up, they might have a, actually, again, I think I get echo from you. Can I mute you? Okay, let me mute. So a lot of the time, people get stressed in an interview and they may not understand the question correctly, and they are shy to ask clarification question, or sometimes the purpose of the interview is to seed you with the vague question and expect you to clarify the next level of details. And most of the time, people also have this standard engineering mindset that, oh, if the interviewer is giving me the question, he should be knowing what he's asking about. But you being on the stage, the question clarify is also expected. And I feel like a lot of people, especially at the junior levels, like, for some reason, sometimes it's cultural reasons, that in our culture also we typically don't question the people in authority. But in US culture, you are expected to do the right thing, irrespective of other people's level, position, and so on. I think being the one questioning, clarifying is very critical. I think that I've seen a lot of people fail. So I think, in summary, prep well. I'm sure, I mean, Emre is very strong at this. If you listen to his advices, I'm sure you will do a good job on preparation. And the second, being confident, asking for clarity, and having sometimes step back and ask the questions. I think those are my big advices.
Very good points. Thank you very much, Fatih. So this question comes from our students. What can we do to become the most valued engineers in the company? Like, you already give us some pointers. Do you want to elaborate more? What skills you have seen in the people who are very influential?
Yeah, I think for you to be the most successful value generation for a given company, I think you really need to understand what skill set that company needs for success. And the answer to this for Google versus, let's say, NVIDIA could be very different, because the skill sets that they need for success is going to be very different. So if the definition of success is defined as, I mean, growing in the ladder, let's say promotions or growth, I would say you should, as a person yourself, I think you should deeply understand what are the core business drivers for a given company. And for Google, in general, there are few things that is very critical to company versus their side businesses. For example, advertising is a core to Google's existence. Search, YouTube, these are existential products. Versus there are some products that might be new. There's a high chance of failure, and it may not be core competency of Google, right? Like, industrial design is core to Apple, but it's something that Google is evolving and slowly trying to adapt. Retail is core to Amazon, versus for Google, it's new. So working at retail for Google may not be the best choice you would have. but maybe advertising could be the best one. So knowing where to be, where to work is one of the key choices. And the second is, in general, a lot of companies are looking for people with the flexible mindset, meaning that you should not, the way I explain this is, you should not optimize for the solution space. You should optimize for the problem space. And what this means is, for the success of that business, are you focusing on the right problems? Are you defining the right problems? Or you are married to a particular solution. And when I say particular solution, it could be particular design language, it could be particular infrastructure. None of those should matter as long as you are focusing on the right problem. So I think having that flexibility that you can detach yourself from the solution, but focus on the solving the problems, defining those problems, and not being stuck into particular domain and having that flexibility to move around, I think has been the biggest value for the company. Because when I look at even last 5 years, the landscape changed so much that what we used to do as best practice 5 years back versus today is very different. I'll give you a few examples. Apple completely changed the privacy landscape on how advertising should work. You have to redefine the rules. You cannot operate on the old rules. And the second thing is, right now there's a big economical burden in US and many other countries, forcing us to redefine how should we optimize for the best for advertisers as well as Google. And we did not have these level of challenges before. The market landscape with, say, TikTok and Facebook, Instagram changing aggressively. User behavior is changing. People are moving into short form video consumption. People are moving into large screen TVs. So when the landscape is so dynamic and fast, having that static mindset is not gonna work. So being flexible, fast, adaptive, seeing the big picture always, I think has been the key levers for success, with the first condition that I mentioned, being at the right place always. And sometimes I tell people this, you may be happy with what you are doing right now, but always question, are you at the local optima? Or can there always be better option for your success, which I call global optima? So always look for plan B, always keep your eyes open, even if you're happy with where you are. I think this is another one for your personal success, because you might be happy with team A in a given company, but there might be new efforts with the changing landscape that you could have multiplier effects in team B. So I think always being open for plan B and always having plan B, I think is a recommendation for personal success as well.
Actually, specific framework recommendations. But as you mentioned, if we are actually looking for a success at the highest level, these become irrelevant, because these are tools that we can choose based on the problem we have in hand. But focusing on the problem, making sure that we solve the right problem by optimizing the right metrics, this is going to give us the success in the long run in different circumstances.
Actually, we don't care which language background you have. That's not an important thing. As long as you know one language, I mean, even at interviews, they ask you, hey, which language do you want to code this? Nobody cares whether it's Python or Java or C++. And I never had a case where we reject someone just because that person doesn't know C or C++, which we need. It's just like in 2 weeks, 1 week, anyone can learn any language. As long as you know one language, let's say object-oriented language, all of them same. I don't see it's different. Even if you don't know object-oriented language or whatever, like script languages and etc. It's so easy these days. I think it's all going back to foundational problem solving. It's much harder to teach someone foundational problem solving, debugging skills, analytical thinking, or even basics of communication. I would say even communication is very critical skill set. Many times pulling people from success because they cannot just communicate. And software engineering is is a social work. Like you need to collaborate with so many people. I think I would rather focus on those angles. But of course, this doesn't mean that like language and those things not important, because you have to get those foundations right to pass the bar. But the definition of success will be way beyond that.
And Fatih, actually, you said that you never, experienced somebody getting rejected because of lack of knowledge. This is a very good one, because it was a question on people's minds. And another one that I want to bring attention to is, did you ever see somebody getting rejected because they asked the question in the interview?
I mean, I think it really depends, right? Like if asking questions is always expected, but then I've seen cases that the questions asked in an arrogant way. I think we always have this section, I mean, you may be familiar also, like googliness, like basically respecting the people, respecting our peers, and working in a collaborative way. I've seen one candidate, I remember, he asked the question, I think it was funny. Like I was asking the candidate, hey, can you write more of a like there's n arrays of size n, can you merge all of them? Very simple question, right? And I remember he's saying array list dot sort, array list dot merge and then dot sort. I'm like, I'm not asking you to use the API. Can you just write down how this API will work? And he was like, oh, why would I even write this? I will always use the API. It's not practical. I'm like, assume that you are part of the Java API team at Google. Can you write it? Oh, I wouldn't work in the API team. Like, for example, this kind of arrogance, as you can imagine, this guy failed, of course. And the set of questions like, oh, are you guys writing API? And like, it was so random. It's like the expectation here, when you ask the question, it should be in lines of clarification or within the scope of what interviewer was trying to ask. As long as you are not doing any arrogance or kind of undermining the question or kind of trying to say, why would I ever do that? I think that's not okay as a fun part, but otherwise, no. I mean, the question is always good.
Thank you. So what is one challenge, or if you have any, that keeps coming throughout your career again and again on your way?
I think stakeholder management combined with being on the same page / expectation setting is quite an interesting challenge. Like typically when we work on a problem, you never work or solve the problem by yourself. It's a combination of multiple teams. And especially when you have multiple stakeholders across different time zones and locations, job letters, keeping people on the same page is continuing to become a challenge. Like a lot of the time people jump into solution space, they talk different languages, especially if the topic is so complex and if you have people from sales and engineering and the product, like everyone is talking like different things that are tangential. So I think bringing everyone on the same page has been the challenge. But then on the other hand, like the solution to that has been very simple, always documentation. Because what I found repeatedly over time and time, we talk and we think that we are aligned, but then there's a difference between verbal language versus written language. Somehow, when you write it down, you clarify your thoughts and your assumptions and the key invariants in the system. And then people realize that, oh, actually, these were the assumptions that I did not have in mind, or I did not know this is the success criteria. So having this function of forcing people into, hey, what problem are we solving? What are the key assumptions in the system? What is the definition of success? Especially with the different job letters, etc. I think this has been the most complex thing to solve, but the funny part is it all goes back to better documentation and better writing. So the other thing I forgot in the previous questions, I think writing skills and being able to simplify your thoughts in a one-pager is also a very important skill set. A lot of people say this, but writing long is easy, writing short is hard, and that's very true.
That's an excellent point, Fatih. And like as a person who struggled in the early years of his career in technical writing, I felt the pain in my career. So what would you recommend to our teammates? How do you think they can improve their technical writing skills and they can say more with less words?
I mean, so by the way, like in life, I believe in this learning mindset versus fixed mindset. So I think from a lot of people I hear that, oh, this is an area that I cannot improve, like whether it's even verbal communication or whatever it is. I think it's always like, as long as your mind is open and you can learn and try, I think you can do anything. Go to YouTube and search for Eric Schmidt, 96. I think when he was CTO of Sun, he's giving public speaking in Toastmasters, and see how bad he is back then versus how amazing he is now. It's all learning. So going back to the technical writing, that was more about the verbal communication. I think it's reading books has been super critical because it enhances your vocabulary and kind of like you learn from the best how to convey your ideas. And the other thing is always, even on your personal life or whatever it is, like when you have a meeting, always forcing you to write something, like start writing. It might look ugly initially, but over time with the feedback, like asking your peers, asking your managers, I don't know if you guys have that concept here, but like your seniors, your peers, or whoever, I think asking for feedback, exercising something that you want to excel at. Like there's always this question of when I should start doing this. The answer is, in my opinion, is right away. Like doesn't matter you suck at it, it's fine, but you need to start from somewhere, and this is always improvement delta function from where you were before. So I think repeatedly doing that, asking for feedback. There's, I mean, if you go to YouTube and Google search, there's so many useful docs and videos about this. Reading books in all fashion has been greatly useful to me. So, and there's also a lot of books just purely dedicated on writing well, especially in English. So, I mean, it's.
So at the end of the day, like any other skill, this is a skill that we can develop by investing our time, by doing, by getting information and getting feedback by people who are better than us. It can help us to become effective writers. So,
yeah, by the way, sometimes the way we frame this is everything in life is a framework. And whether the framework for a success at a given company versus a startup versus your personal skill set learning could all be different. But the way to look at these things, build the right framework for learning, because how I learn things could be different than yourself. And this is also, to be honest, reverse engineering yourself, like understanding how to get better at things. There was one book called Atomic Habits. The idea was about if you want to be good at something, like how do you fit that into your routine and make that a routine such that it just becomes part of yourself at some point. So I actually recommend checking that book. Like it's building that framework for you to develop the habits that you would like to have. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Fatih, also mentioning about this important book about habit building. Like Atomic Habits is one of the books that we suggest our teammates, but hearing this from someone like you, I hope it's going to resonate and more people are going to invest in building their good habits and breaking their bad habits. So actually we can stay in the books a little more. Like, are there any other influential books in your career that you would recommend us? Oh, you guys should definitely check this out. And why?
I mean, Atomic Habits was definitely one. The other thing I liked quite a bit is Principles from Ray Dalio. Like, by the way, I can send some of these to chat, and you can share out, Emre, if you want. So like, I remember Principles was also about exactly like, how do you look at life as a framework? And he was dividing it as principles for the success at work or office versus in your personal life. And it has this analytical thinking. I remember many other books, like, for example, 0 to 1 from Peter Thiel. I think that was also very insightful. And there was something about brain also, like how brain works, and by understanding how your system works and reverse engineering that in a way that you could trick it for success, I think was interesting. Was it called 1,000 Brains or something? I don't remember, but it was super insightful as well. Like, so in general, I like books that are around either success of others, like, for example, the founder of Nike. That was super interesting. I just read the book from Tony Fadell about his life and his learnings. So reading and learning from the best who succeeded in the areas that you respect, I think that I always recommend. And the books around, whether it's principles or the framework or reverse engineering, especially brain related stuff, I love it. I think it applies to our engineering, because a lot of the principles on distributed systems like machine learning is pretty much trying to reverse engineer the brain structure. Even the caching solution is frontal cortex. Like, the way that the brain works is like there's some cache versus long-term memory. And actually 0 to 1 also kind of goes into those concepts, that like a lot of the things that are habit-based are like fast retrieval systems with low latency, versus anything that requires analytical thinking. Math is more about, you need to, like, there's some latency, right? When I asked you 15 multiplied by 23, there's a latency in the system that needs some math, versus some basic things. When you see a dog or something, you just know that it's danger and I should move away. So I think reverse engineering, like human brain, I think has been always exciting and interesting and applicable to my day-to-day job. I also remember, I forgot the guy's name, but it's more about understanding human empathy and human relationships. I think, I don't remember the book names, but I will send you guys those offline. I think, like, that's another angle, because software engineering is not just like knowing the brain, setting up frameworks and being analytical, learning from the best, but equally human psychology, like having the empathy, creating win-win relationships. I think there were a lot of interesting books on that as well.
Well, Fatih, this is such a great portfolio, and we are looking forward to get the list later on, and it would be my pleasure to share with the rest of the team. So, Fatih, the next question is an interesting one. If you had a chance to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
So actually, one thing, I'm so happy that, like, picking the computer science, I think one of the best life decisions I've ever made. I'm so happy, because back then I was thinking, oh, should I do electrical engineering or industrial engineering and blah, blah. But I think, assuming you guys all in computer science, I think that's probably, like, I feel so lucky, because it's an area that you can work in any company or any industry, like whether healthcare, education, advertisement, media, like everything is becoming software. So sometimes just going back and saying that, oh my God, I really made the right decision and I'm so happy to be being computer scientist or engineer, I think that's amazing. You should just feel super lucky. Going back to that question, one thing that I didn't like, I should have come to Valley. Like I went for internship, I went to Seattle, Microsoft. I started full-time in AWS. It was fine, cool, but I felt like Bay Area and the culture here is way more different anywhere else in US. I think that's one thing I would have totally changed. I would not have gone to Seattle, but Bay Area, that's one change. The other thing which I learned very late in my career, so I remember one advice someone has given me like long time back is work on things that matter to company success. Like for example, when I first came to Google, I've spent two and a half years in Google Glass because back then I was more into, oh, this is super cool, interesting, but then it's not really Google's competency, and as a business, it was a failure. But focusing on things that are core to business and aligning your job with the success of the company, I think having that smartness embedded into my system came out very late, in my opinion. So I would definitely be smart about where to work as much as, like, it's not just the company, right? It's also where within the company. I think this was the same idea with university. Like, it doesn't matter you go to, like, just say Harvard or I don't know, one university. Equally important is which division within that company, within that, or which engineering or which like skill set you want to develop. I think it's the same for the company. What else? I mean, I would have invested more on like learning and curiosity early on. Like I think in undergrads, especially, I spent a lot more time on like getting good grades and kind of doing well in school and getting master PhD acceptance, but less about developing beyond technical skill sets. I think I would have invested early on if I had the opportunity back then. Internship at US might have changed my mindset. So I think I wish I had exposure to things beyond the culture that I lived in back then. And maybe having more mentorships early on and being open to learning from anyone and reaching out to anyone, even people will say no. Why does it matter? Like in our culture, we used to have, if you are rejected, it's not a good thing. But then here people look at, even if you are rejected 99 times, but one yes will give you the multiplier success. Who cares? Like, why does that 99 matter anymore? So I think I would have also changed my mindset around being rejected or having the answer of continuous no's, as long as there's one yes in between. So
Well, Fatih, many engineers, including me, we get to the awareness of these, I believe, later than you did. But at the same time,
I didn't have someone having me Q&A session when I was in undergrad. At least I don't remember.
So true. And like, yes, what we are teaching them, we weren't taught when we were in their seats. But I hope, like when you mentioned about that, this is going to make it very clear to our teammates that this is a great opportunity. Learning from somebody like you, who has proven himself in many different steps with very different challenges at a company like Google, and getting this advice, this is a big opportunity. So personally, I'm grateful for my team, and I hope they are going to increase their awareness level on these important issues that you have mentioned. So next question is about like software engineers and machine learning engineers, which I believe the difference is going to get smaller and smaller in time, as machine learning is becoming the big brother among pretty much all the computer science disciplines. So, like, how would you position yourself? Let's say you were starting your career now. Like, at what time you would get exposure to machine learning, if you are going to get?
I think the way I look at machine learning, I would even say statistics is a core skill set or tool set that any engineer should have in their portfolio. I mean, similarly, like knowing distributed systems, the cloud systems, understanding scalability, like a lot of those things, I feel like part of the key tool set right now. I don't know if it will be still called specialization anymore, because when I look at a lot of solutions these days, it's some form of automation. Like in I can give an example from ad systems. Like everything is automation, meaning that you need some machine learning component in it, whether it's a simple heuristic based with some logistic regression or something super complex, doesn't matter. Like you need it somewhere in the system. So to me, if I were to prioritize, definitely I would add that into my tool set. But make sure that you are not like, you know, the surface level of everything, but you know nothing in depth. So I think as long as you are good at some particular area in depth, but also you have that learning like skill set to develop and machine learning or statistics or just overall understanding of metrics or like in a distributed system, I think that ability to learn how to figure things out yourself is, I would say, the biggest skill set rather than just the machine learning itself. And yeah, as summary, I think it's just very critical these days that I feel like it's no longer going to be called a specialization, but a common tool set that everyone should be using.
Thank you, Fatih. And next question. So how do companies, maybe you have a very good exposure to Google, like how do engineers being evaluated? What are the criteria that are looked?
There are multiple dimensions. I think I would say maybe high-level 3 buckets. One is complexity. I think the second is leadership, and the third one is impact. Let's start with the last one. I think it's the most obvious one. I think, as the name implies, your work should produce some value for a company, right? Like if your work doesn't produce any value, then you don't have impact. And on that dimension, you will fail. The second one is leadership, and leadership has multiple components, I think, and this expectation on leadership at different levels changes drastically. So leadership is things like thriving in ambiguity. Like, can you solve ambiguous problems? Leadership is influence. Within the domain that you're operating, can you influence? What is your insight? What is net new you are bringing to the table? If you are just task executioner, given a very clear problem statement, you execute like in college, you are going to fail and you're not going to grow. I think a lot of things on leadership is around basically having that strategic depth, understanding, defining new things, influencing the work, not just for yourself, but work of others as well, collaboration, motivation. Like I think as the job scale grows, you need to be able to motivate teams. You need to influence the roadmap. You need to bring teams. You need to turn the ship around for underperforming teams to performing teams. So the leadership basket is super big. And the first one is the complexity. So are you solving problems that are complex enough to justify some core traits? And the complexity could be because it requires very deep collaboration across 10 different teams, like 10 different systems or 20 different systems. It could be there is no right technical answer, and there might be 5 different design solutions, and then each of them might have different caveats, and time to market and so on, you being able to evaluate these option lists with different stakeholders and make a recommendation and align people is an example of complexity for consensus or architectural thinking or design thinking. Sometimes the complexity comes from the technical depth, like it could be a code base that nobody touched for years, nobody knows. You need to go and debug and figure out. It could be legacy stuff and so on. So it could be say coding complexity. Sometimes it could be the metric ambiguity, like there's no perfect way to measure it and you need to figure out different experimentation strategies to figure out. So I think going back up, like these are the key 3 dimensions. Like, are you solving hard problems? Are you creating business value? Are you showing leadership skill sets? So I think these are the key dimensions that we evaluate.
Thank you, Fatih. And so we are going to finish in 2 minutes. Unfortunately, there is a time limit that we can use the facility for. So, Fatih, any other points that you would like to mention that we didn't touch?
No, I think in general, these were very good set of questions. I think what I would recommend is at the end of the day, success or whatever you want is just within yourself. I think whatever the background you're coming from, your family, your friends, none of those matters if you don't have the right within yourself. And a lot of the time, answer for success is you having a clear goal and you marching towards that. And it's all within your mindset. And over time, repeatedly, I found that if you have the right mindset, you will get the right things. And having the positive attitude and positive thinking, I think, is the greatest way to march towards success. I think if you define what you want, if you're focused on it, and if you have the right framework and positive thinking, I think it's all boils down to that. So I think that's my biggest advice. A lot of these things like technology, Google, company, are all those details. It all boils down to yourself and your mindset. I think just keep that strong and you will get what you want.
Well, Fatih, thank you very much. This was a pleasure. I wish we had more time, but I hope in the near future we can have another chance to continue this great conversation.
Sure, happy to. Great chatting with you guys. Best of luck.
Thank you very much for your time and hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.